Today's guest is Cheryl Waldrup. She's principal consultant at AIMC Consulting, which is a woman-owned business here in the DC area. Cheryl is also a graduate of the 2012 ACT-IAC Partners program, and that's actually how we both met. We both interact with ACT-IAC. We're both fellows, both partner fellows. And Cheryl's an amazing person. I'm so glad that you finally agreed to come on the podcast. So thank you.
No, thank you, Jeremy. I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you today.
So for those who don't actually know your background and history, talk a bit about, where you're from, who you are, and what you do.
So I'm a native of Louisiana, the Bayou State. I guess my story sort of starts in high school. So I was very fortunate in high school. I was on the yearbook and newspaper staff in high school. And one of our mentors was a gentleman that was a local newspaper photographer. He had actually been a photographer in Vietnam. So he had some really amazing stories. Where I grew up in Leesville, Louisiana is very close to Fort Polk, a large Army base, so a lot of military influence. He had been a photographer in Vietnam, and he was now a local newspaper photographer. And he really encouraged my interest in photography as well as journalism as a whole. Introduced me to the latest technology, which this was quite a while ago, so it's probably not considered very high tech now, but back then it was. And I was fascinated with the different ways to create images. And I became actually kind of obsessed with it. And I eventually went to work after school at the same newspaper where he had worked. Oh, wow. So he mentored me, taught me a lot of techniques. In a local newspaper, you do everything from crime photos to the local football game. So a lot of diversity in terms of the images that we were creating. When I eventually left Leesville in the 80s, I moved to Las Vegas, which was quite different from a cultural perspective. And I went to work at Showbiz Magazine and eventually became the associate editor of Showbiz Magazine, which had a 800,000 person circulation at that point. So a fairly sizable publication, and had a lot of access to. At that point, Macintosh had been introduced into the publishing world. And so I had a lot of access to really awesome technology in terms of not just creating images, but publishing in general. And that was of great interest to me. Years later, I moved to the DC area to get married. Actually, my fiance was had been at the Pentagon and was now retired from the military and was living here. And I moved to DC and I went to work for a international stock photography agency in Georgetown. And I loved it. I thought it was great, but the pay was not great. So one day my husband said to me, Cheryl, if you really want to make any money in this town, because I thought about, the Washington Post is here. I could, really flex my journalism muscles. But he mentioned the fact that there were lots of unique opportunities in the government contracting arena. And I didn't really know anything about government contracting. I had heard the term Beltway Bandit, and I kind of knew what that was. And I certainly didn't want to fall into that category. But I was then introduced, I started asking around, and some folks introduced me to a number of different contractors. And there was a company in Crystal City, a Navy contractor called General Physics at the time. I think now they go by GP Strategies. And they were looking for somebody to run a multimedia division. And that kind of fit in. There was a lot of imagery there that really fit into, my background. I thought it sounded interesting. And if I remember correctly, the salary was probably twice what I was making at the stock photography agency. So it was very appealing. I got there and then discovered what we were really doing was creating basically a mock-up of what controls look like on a nuclear submarine. They were, fascinating, right? Which I knew nothing about. They were launching a submarine onboard training program, and they wanted to have kind of a kiosk on board the submarine where sailors, when they were not on duty, could actually take these various courses. And it was fascinating. I mean, it was really fascinating because obviously I'd never had any exposure to a nuclear submarine before. But I worked in Crystal City. There were 55 people in my office and two women, myself and the receptionist.
Oh, wow.
So it was, yeah, it was kind of a rude awakening. But fascinating. Again, I got to know a lot about the Navy, specifically submarines, and then, government contracting as a whole, how contracts work, what deliverables are, and why you need to, stay on time to deliver on time and on budget. And I guess the rest is kind of history. I will say that during that time, I did have access to a lot of really advanced technology that I wouldn't have otherwise had access to. And without going into too many details, I eventually ended up doing work that was associated with biometrics. And that was the technology that I still really, really love and enjoy today. And of course, biometrics has come a long way in the last couple of decades too. And it was, somewhat controversial at the time that I entered the field. Facial recognition. I mean, the basic fingerprint, finger, face, and iris was basically the area that I was working in. But facial recognition became a really useful tool, not just for law enforcement, but today we use it to log on to pretty much everything, and I've stayed, interested in that biometrics field. And really it's all about imaging, right? The output, the files that are output from the various biometric systems are forms of images, different types of images. So I think I've come full circle in terms of that imagery.
Wow, that's very interesting. Yeah, I meet a lot of people who talk about biometrics and fear. There's still some fear, right? Even in today's more modern world, there's a fear of it. I went on a cruise last year, and the cruise lines now have it where they take your photo and then
Yes,
they compare your face to that photo as you're
right.
boarding the ship. So they have good they use it for accounting for where everybody is. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then I think I saw at an ACT-IAC event many years ago, somebody came from ICE and showed some biometric face recognition technology they were using to watch for human trafficking. So they would look for, they would feed the system with photos of of kids who were in war-torn countries where they were forced into being a soldier, and their image was posted online, right, with them holding a gun or something. And then they would look for those kids as they came through the border to see if they were being
Right.
human trafficked into America. A fascinating use case that absolutely is necessary. And I don't even know how you would do it otherwise.
Yeah, I think, DHS probably is still the largest user of biometrics in terms of the federal government, whether you're talking about ICE or CBP or even TSA. And the thing about fear of the technology, and lots of technologies in the early stages have fear associated with them. Biometrics has been around a lot longer than most people think, literally for decades, and yet there is still that fear factor. But I think what we're seeing happen in the market is people are becoming less fearful and trading that fear for convenience, right? So, if you see, like, for example, the Clear program at a lot of the larger airports, I know I stand in the Clear line every time I'm at Dulles, or Global Entry, all of those programs prevent you from having to stand in the really long line, and people are, trading off that imagery or that personal information in exchange for convenience. And I think, as people get more accustomed to that, I imagine, some of the fear will go away. It's still a super useful tool for law enforcement. In fact, that thing you mentioned about the children, they can take images of children that, were maybe kidnapped or disappeared many, many years ago. And through the use of DNA from family members and other pieces of biometrics, they can create an image that shows you what that child would look like as an adult, years later. And that's super useful in terms of finding missing people. There's also a lot of security uses, of biometrics, but you're absolutely right. There's still some fear associated with it.
Well, hopefully people, I mean, and It's funny, ironically, I have a small amount. Like when I go through the TSA line, I'm like, no, 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 I don't want my picture taken. I don't know why I felt that way because the cruise line already has it. I don't know. Maybe it's the governmental piece. Even though I work for the government, sometimes I don't always trust the government to use my data wisely. But then, at the end of the day, I'm going to get global entry. My wife and I already been talking about it. So who knows? Who knows?
Trust me, when you come off the cruise ship and there's 300 people standing in that customs line, it's so nice to walk over there and just put your hand down and let it scan your face and be done with it. I also think, it's not just about convenience. I think people are starting to realize that your image is already in a lot of different places, right? If you have a driver's license, they have your photograph. Many other biometrics are captured maybe with or without your knowledge. So, it's hard to escape at this point.
Yeah, I think the fear probably is generated most by Hollywood, right? Their bombastic views in the different spy movies and those sorts of things probably lend us to believe more nefarious uses of our data when it's not really that way.
Jeremy, it's funny you say that. I worked for a biometric software company called Dayon in Reston, here in Reston Town Center for years. And at that time, there were a lot of movies that came out that featured biometrics, like Minority Report, and actually I don't remember all the names of the others, but there were a couple James Bond movies in particular where the information that they were using, and obviously it's Hollywood, so they're just trying to create entertainment, but they would show things like chopping off somebody's hand and holding that up to an access panel, or plucking out someone's eye and using that for an access panel. And the truth of the matter is, with most systems, if you don't have a liveness, there's a liveness test. So if you don't have blood flowing through that hand or through that eye, it doesn't actually work. So it became a pet peeve of mine. I actually wrote to some of the technical advisors at the movie studios saying, hey, because I was working in marketing of biometrics, and I was like, this is so false, and this is why people are becoming fearful, because you're putting something out there like, I can take a piece of Scotch tape and get your fingerprint and suddenly I'll be able to access your computer. None of that is true. So I wrote letters many times, and I'm sure it was a complete waste of time. Although a couple of them did actually respond to me and explained that, hey, this is entertainment. We're making a movie, not a documentary.
Oh, but it's funny, right? Because there is that intersection of entertainment with real life, and sometimes they complement each other, and sometimes they cause grief.
Right.
So Cheryl, when you look back at your career, what's something or more than one thing that you go, man, I wish we didn't do it that way. There's a better way to do that, and I'll caveat and say we're not going to come up with what that efficiency should be or that change should be to make it better today, but we would like to highlight it, and maybe somebody else will take it up and run with it. So what's something that you've seen looking back that you wish just was done differently?
I'd have to say one of the things that has impacted me the most are various mentorship programs. And I wish that more companies and agencies had formalized mentor protege programs. And I'm not talking about mentor protege for companies, but rather individuals inside the organization. I think without having that mentorship, and I've already mentioned a couple of times how impactful the mentors were in my career, and ACT-IAC played a big role in that as well. So I served as a mentor, I guess, over the last 10 years to 2 or 3 different folks through the ACT-IAC mentorship program. And it has a great impact on career advancement, building self-esteem, just becoming more knowledgeable. And ironically, I've mentored people that were typically significantly younger than me. And I often tell them, I've learned as much or more from you than you have from me. And I think that intergenerational, play back and forth is a really healthy thing. And I wish that we saw that more, in companies and in agencies. I know that it is increasing, and I think it's increasing because of organizations like ACT-IAC. But I feel like, that would be a way to not only kind of invite more people to participate in our industry, but to show them what the real advantages are in working for the federal government, whether it's on the contracting side or the federal agency side. We need to bring in more people from the younger generations. I think we're kind of failing at that, or at least that's what I hear in some of the statistics that I read. And I feel like that mentorship program could really create a scenario where we're recruiting more of the types of people that we want to see, but not just recruiting them, but making sure that they enjoy their experience and grow in their experience so they don't take what they've learned and go off somewhere else.
That's so fascinating. You're not the first person who's mentioned to me recently about mentorship and better programs that engage younger people and connect them with people. It's always interesting to me when I talk to those who run those programs. They are also suffering to get mentors to volunteer. And I think maybe we need to do a better job. I'm not trying to say we're solving this today, right? But it could be of interest that maybe we need to do a better job of selling why somebody should be a mentor and what they get out of that exchange. It's not just a time suck. It's not just somebody who's taking from you, but like you, I've mentored many people, and I have found it to be a very valuable experience where they're coming with a different point of view I never would have considered. They ask really good questions that I may never have asked in my own career and wish I had asked and known to ask that question earlier in my career. That can, better reflect and also help me when I mentor somebody else in the future. Right now, I know some questions that young people have asked in the past. But we do need to consider ways to get more people engaged in being mentors.
I totally agree. And through some of my mentorship that I've done in the last few years, I got introduced to some new technologies that I might not have looked at. For instance, artificial intelligence. I'm very fascinated by AI and machine learning. And again, it kind of goes back to that imagery thing that I love so much. There are so many uses of AI that involve creativity and be able to, create images. In fact, I felt so strongly about it, and so strongly about the fact that it is kind of the technology that's going to change the way we live. I went back to school 2 years ago and got certification in AI and machine learning at the Wharton School. And their program is excellent. I highly recommend it. And what it taught me was not just the underlying technology, the programming, so to speak, but what the uses are and how to distinguish between good uses and maybe uses that aren't so good, and how to apply, the positive uses of the technology. It's another one of those technologies that people are afraid of, right? And I totally blame that again on Hollywood and perhaps the media, because there's, just been a lot of negativity surrounding AI, when in fact, we're all using AI every day, whether we realize it or not, or at least we're being exposed to it. And it is important for our country to be a leader in that technology, just as we want to be a leader, in other technologies.
Absolutely. That's something else I hadn't considered is those of us who are, well down the path of our career, going back and doing something like you did and go into a program to learn again. First of all, I think learning never stops. You should constantly be doing opportunities to learn, whether it's an official program or on your own. But going into an official program, I imagine you had an opportunity to interact with some younger people.
Very much so. And learned a tremendous amount from them. I consider myself a lifelong learner. I'm always trying to learn something new. I read constantly, probably too much, because I have this habit, especially with the folks that I'm mentoring currently or those I've mentored in the past. I have a habit of sending them articles and saying, you really need to read this. You really need to check this out. Some of them I'm sure appreciate it. I'm not sure they all do, but it's just fascinating to learn new things and to feel like you're not getting left behind. As I get older, that's becoming more and more important to me. I don't want to be left behind. I want to be on the forefront, not just of technology, but leadership, skills and other things that are important in life. So yes, I think, going back and getting into whether, like you said, whether it's formal or informal learning, it does not just expose you to younger people, but a more diverse group of people who have, different types of backgrounds, which I find really helpful, useful, especially in my mentorship.
Absolutely. So we'll caveat all that, or not caveat, but we'll complete all that by saying, yes, we need more mentorship. We need more event mentors to volunteer, and we need more people to want to participate in those programs. They don't understand the value they're going to get, but it's immeasurable. So, Cheryl, as you look here into the new year, what's coming up for you?
I served on the executive committee at ACT-IAC for 2 terms, and after that was over, I kind of felt like, oh no, I don't want that to end because I enjoyed it so much, having influence and seeing the advances in the association and the companies and the agencies that participate. But I got very interested in their small business alliance. Most of my clients at AIM are small businesses. And what I found was whether you're a small business that's brand new to the federal space or a small business that's been in it a while, there's things that you still struggle with. There's been in the last few years a lot of effort by the current administration to help small businesses, and that really is wonderful. In fact, I think there's some new action going on right now that is helping small businesses. But it has to be, it needs to be consistent, right? It needs to be constant. And the Small Business Alliance at ACT-IAC is probably where I'll spend most of my free time in the new year, because I just see so many really valuable small businesses that are struggling to figure out where they fit in when it comes to federal contracting. We have made great strides in the acquisition arena when it comes to awarding to small businesses, but there's still a lot of work to do. And, I constantly hear complaints about, are some of these small business procurements really just a way for a small business to front for a much larger firm?
Mm-hmm.
That's something that I think is being scrutinized on a pretty regular basis. I'm a huge fan of the Small Business Administration. I love some of the things that they're trying to do right now. And so for me, I'm devoting a lot of my time to that Small Business Alliance. And that's another one of the ways to pay it forward, right? I've had, a certain degree of success, and I want to be able to help other companies that are, either entering the space or maybe struggling a little bit. And the Small Business Alliance, as well as my work at AIM, gives me that opportunity, and I'm excited about it.
Well, Cheryl, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast. I look forward to what you're going to do with the Small Business Alliance and everything that you do at ACT-IAC, and I appreciate it. And once again, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Oh, thank you, Jeremy. It's been fun.